Hello everyone, welcome back to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting and I'm going to be adding a little bit of Christmas joy to the month of July. Who says December is the only month that we can have Christmas joy? I'm going to be adding a little bit of jingle to July by painting a Christmas chicken, right? Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. It's called Christmas in July. We have two hosts today. We have Krista with Krista's Crafty Life and Brenda with Rustic Lace and DIY. You're going to find the links down inside of the description box, as well as a playlist of all the rest of the videos that have been contributed today. I'm going to be breaking down the steps to show you how I painted her to create her feathers and how to paint her sweet little face. For those of you who would like to have some help drawing that you might want to do this Christmas chicken too, I do have a sketchbook membership. That's over on my Ko-fi page. I'll leave the link down inside of the description box. It's very easy to join and very reasonably priced. For those of you who would like to have some help, or you don't like drawing at all, but you would rather do a trace and paint option, come on over to my Ko-fi page and check it out. I'd love to have more creative friends join me there. Well, let's get started. I'm going to show you how I created this Christmas cutie using a piece of wood from my local thrift store. I like the price of this. This was only $1.50, and I love the square shape, and it had that little bonus of the curly wire on the top, so it came home with me. I thought I was going to start with this white plaster color, but I decided to paint it black. To go ahead and be able to transfer my image once I drew it, I used the Sorel tracing paper. It's one of my favorites. It does have a white in the inside of the package, so it works great for tracing over darker colors. You can put your paper down, go ahead and line it up where you want it, and then just use a pencil to go over your image, and it's going to transfer the white onto the black, and it's so much easier to see once you do it this way. I'll have links down inside of my description box area for any of the things I used today that you might be interested in using. This product does leave kind of a little bit of a chalkiness over the top, but you can just simply wipe it off with a damp paper towel. I wanted to make a Santa hat for my chicken, so I was going to use a little bit of tracing paper, draw around the image, and then I went ahead and I put some glue stick on the front of where I had drawn, and then just simply put a little bit of Christmas style paper on the top. And then you have that image drawn on the back so you can see where you need to cut it, and I was going to just simply cut it out, and that was going to be my chicken's hat. For my chicken, I wanted to use Christmassy colors, so I chose 3 shades of red and 3 shades of green to be able to do the feathers in. And then I chose a golden color for his beak and a variety of rust colors. For those who are in my sketchbook membership, I will go ahead and give you a written list of the colors that I used, but basically use what you have. If you want to do a Christmas chicken, just choose out some colors of Christmas that you might like to use. To do the feathers, I did use a filbert brush, which has a rounded edge on it, but you don't necessarily have to use this brush, but it did work well to go ahead and create the feathers because of that rounded edge on the brush. And I basically started with my darker color first, and then I started topping my lighter colors on the top. I didn't wash out my brush in between colors. That just makes for a nice blend of color. I go up by the little beak and then get a little wider as I come down. I did lose some footage on this. I thought I had recorded the green, putting the green on, but I didn't. But basically, I put the green on the same way. I started with the dark one first, and then I put the mediums and the lights on as well. I did give it a dry in between my red and my green so I wouldn't be muddying up my colors. Those are complementary colors, so if you get those blended too much, they're going to end up looking more like a brown. So I wanted my red to stay red, and I wanted my greens to stay green. And this is where I say drats, I didn't have my camera on, but basically I applied the green paint the same way. I just started with my dark and then layered my medium and my light on, not washing my brush out in between. And you might notice you can see little peaks of black peeking through the feathers, and I think that adds a nice little quality to this. Now this black paint does absorb your colors in. So once my green had dried, I went back to my red and added additional layers on top, still trying to leave a little bit of black underneath there. That black's going to absorb your colors, and you may need to add a little bit more brightness to them after they dry. Now this is just a made up chicken. It's green and red. And normally a chicken wouldn't probably have all that red going all the way down. So if you want to make this a chicken that's not a Christmas chicken, you could possibly just do a little bit of red at the top and then make the rest some sort of other speckly chicken color. It's a chicken you can do lots of ways, but this is just a whimsical style Christmas chicken, and she's looking pretty festive with her green and red feathers. To do the area around her face, I chose a couple different shades of rusty brown shades of brown. I needed to have a little bit of a difference in between around her face. So I'm going to be starting with some white to go ahead and base coat her beak in, because I'm going to be making it a yellowish color, and yellows are very often very transparenty. So I need a little help with the white first. So I base coated in with white first, and then I'll be layering the gold color on the top to make her beak. I added a little bit of rust there too. I like mixing my colors. I often use more than one, but I'm going to start with white first. I pick up a little bit of that golden color and a little bit of a rusty color to go around her eyes. This is the area that I'm going to be trying to make a different shade. In the middle, I want it to be a little darker, but I'm going to be coming around and making this little patch of color around her eyes and a little bit above her beak. With my brush still dirty, I didn't really rinse anything out. I added a little bit more, mixed my colors, added a little bit more of red into this area too, and kind of created a little bit more of a mustardy kind of look in this area. I wanted it to be a little darker than the beak, not as bright as that, but I needed it to be a different color than that little ridge that I have around the outside of her face. So I'm just basically picking up a little bit of color here and there and blending it as I go. I'm painting around her eyes. I'm going to be using black to go ahead and paint in the eyes once I get this section done. With acrylic paint, it does dry slightly darker, so you're going to need to kind of tweak your colors as you go. Put them on, give them a chance to dry. But the really good thing about acrylic paint is that you get a lot of grace and you can always change it. So once it dries, if you don't really like it, you can always add another layer, but let it dry in between before adding more paint. Here I'm adding a little bit more bright gold to the beak to bring it to life. I'm going to be adding some shadows on this too. So it looks a little simple right now with just the one color, but I'm going to be adding a few little bits of color to bring that beak to life too. I'm going to go back in and re-emphasize that little area that goes around the outside of the face so I can get some difference and some contour in the face so it doesn't look so flat. So I re-emphasize that area, and that's where you're going to be able to tweak yours too. So just do that thing where you put your paint on, let it dry. If it looks not quite right, you can always add another layer. I'm basically painting it rather like a color book style in this particular area. With the lines I had already traced on, I can see those through, those chalk lines show up. So I can basically paint it like a color book. I see where my lines are and I can go ahead and paint in that area. This is where I'm adding the black to the eyes. I can go in and reshape the eyes. I'm using a round brush with a nice little sharp point on it. Round brushes work great for this. For this small little area, you might want to add just a little bit of water to your paint. If you find that your paint is dragging and you can't get it to move for yourself very well, always try just a little bit of water and see if that'll get your paint to move slightly better. I mixed up a rusty gold color and I'm putting that around the beak just to add a little bit more dimension and curvature to it. I keep it to around the edges and keep the center a little bit more brighter. By adding the shadowing on the outside of the beak and keeping it bright in the middle, it's going to give it more dimension. Now that my eyes are dry, I'm going to be doing a little bit of floating of highlight color into the eye. This is what's going to help bring these eyes to life. I'm using the light color called Spa Blue, and I'm side loading a very small angle brush. I believe it's about 1/4 inch of an angle, and I'm just dipping my brush into the water, bringing it out of the water, tapping it on my paper towel till I don't see the shine anymore, just adding a little bit of paint to the very tip, and then running it back and forth on my paper. and that blends the paint from one side to the other. And then I can go ahead and stroke, do a C stroke on the right side of each eye to add a little bit of a highlight. Now, if you feel like your shadow is a little too far across, you could take your wet brush and wipe it over it again, just a slightly damp one. This floating technique works great for adding these kind of a watercolor float to your area. The color does look a little bright now, but it's going to soften as it dries. I use that same water floating technique to go ahead and float a darker color on the outside of my eyes. Once the blue has dried fairly well, I can go ahead and float that color on the right side of each eye, on the bottom just a little bit, and then up about halfway on the left side of the eyes. This is just going to set the eyes in a little bit farther, and it's going to help them look like they're not just sitting flat on her head. I also do that water floating technique underneath the area of where the green feathers and her face meet. I run the darker shade of rust underneath that area, and that just adds a little bit more dimension there as well. I also float a rusty color around her beak just to add a little bit more dimension there. And then it's time to add some sparkle to her eyes, and I'm going to be using my stylist and some white paint. Basically dip my stylist in and then do a dot, and to do the little comma strokes, it's a dot and then drag. And by adding these little highlights, it really does bring this little character to life. Every living thing has a catchlight in their eyes, and that's just going to be the little sparkle that brings her to life. I'm trying out a new pencil on this project. It's an extra fine mechanical chalk pencil, and it's spelled B-O-H-I-N. You can erase your lines with that eraser on the end, and you can also erase it with water or to soften your lines with paint too. I really like using this because of that extra fine tip on there. I use this to draw the ornaments in the background. I'll have a link to this down inside of my description box, an Amazon link, if you'd like to try this out. I'm going to also use this to go ahead and do it to create my lettering to see where I should put it. And actually, when I got done with this in the chalky lines, I liked the chalk look on top of the black, and I could have perhaps maybe saved it that way if I just would have put a spray coat layer over the top and then continued on. But I decided to use an ink pen at the end to do my lettering in. But once I had my ornaments all traced on, I started the painting process. I decided I wanted to do some lighter blue shades and red. I love that color combination for Christmas, the blue and the red. So I started out with the spa blue color, which was the floated color I used in my little chick's eyes. And then I used some of the reds that I had used on the center part of her body. That's what I used for the red. These are just simply putting the layers on. Start with your first layers and then see if you need to add additional ones on there. I'm going to include the patterns for the ornaments that I used in for my sketchbook members, so I'll include that in there. A small round brush worked perfect to paint the little elements for this. You can add a little bit more water to your paint, again, if you need to be able to pull your lines a little bit easier, is to add just a little bit more water into your paint. And when you dip your brush in, you can also kind of twist it and pull it towards yourself if you want to create even a more pointy point on your brush. But it really does help to have that small little brush and that nice little point to be able to create the little ribbons. After my paint had time to dry, I decided I wanted to add just a little bit more brighter blue, so I chose the color Bahama Blue. It's still in that turquoisey family, but a nice shade of blue, and that worked perfect for this. To add a little bit more detail, I used the end of my brush and created little polka dots on my ornaments. And you can see where I made my oopsie. I had drugged my hand through the paint, and I was able to easily go in with some of that black paint that I had used. It's called Lamp Black is what I had used in the background in the deco art. And it's a little bit flatter quality of paint, so you didn't really notice where I went in and touched up the black areas. And now that I had all my ornaments in place and my chicken and I decided where the hat was going to be, I decided I needed to change where I had the Christmas lettering. So I was going to try out that idea that all you had to do was erase it with water. It worked fairly well. The part that worked the best though actually was to use the eraser from that pencil on what it actually had. That's what it worked the best, was to just use the eraser. But I was able to erase the lettering and get it faint enough, and then went ahead and retraced it to where I wanted it to be. Now to add in a little bit of fine white details for finishing details for my chicken, and I was going to be using the Jelly Rolls white pen. Sometimes this pen cooperates and works really well, and other times it doesn't. It worked really well for this. I like the small little tip of the Jelly Roll. I used it to create some la la lashes for my chicken because that's what she needed. I put little eyebrows on there, and then I did go down into her body and do a little bit more loose sketching to add some bright highlights to her feathers. I did add a little bit of scribbly bits to her eyes as well. I love loose line work, so I love to add those additional details on there. I did add a few little dashes and line work inside of my ornaments just to add a little bit more line interest to them and create a more creative pattern to them as well. I do love to scribble, so anytime I can add that little bit of extra line work to my pieces, I always do. It's kind of my thing. If scribbling doesn't bring you joy and you'd rather not do this step, you most certainly don't have to, but I really do enjoy that loose line work in all the pieces that I create. Now on to do the lettering. There's lots of different choices that you could do to paint over the lettering. I decided to use my uni ball pen and the white ink, and that worked okay for doing that. I knew I didn't want to use white paint in a brush because I'm just not that great at lettering. So I was either going to use a paint pen or this uni ball pen. And to be honest, I couldn't find my white Posca paint pen, so I decided to use the Uniball pen. It worked okay. Uniball pens will paint on a lot of different surfaces, so that's what I used. In the downstroke areas where the lines are going down, I just added additional marks there. It's got kind of a sketchy pattern, hand-done look, but in the end, I think it looks really good, and I was happy with it. To add a little bit more interest to my background, I watered down some white paint and then splattered it across my project. I used that paper towel to cover up a lot of my chicken and then was just pretty careful to make sure I wasn't getting a lot of white speckles on her, but I like that look. To attach the hat, I used my glue stick again and then just put some glue on the back and stuck it on. To finish off the edge, I decided to use my Stabilio pencil that is in this bright blue color. It's a woody Stabilio. It works kind of like a colored crayon, but it's a water-soluble item, which means it'll activate with water, but I'm just going to be using it more like a crayon style, where I go in on the edges and do some irregular lines. I used a little bit on the ornaments too. It's a little different shade than the paint that I had on there, and I thought that was a nice detail to add. To help the chicken hat look more like a Santa hat, I had some little fluffy yarn that was in my stash, and I decided to take a couple strands of that and add it to the brim, and then I rolled up one and made a little pom-pom on the edge, and I thought that made it look more like a Santa hat and less of like what I would think of as being a sleep hat, I guess, but I thought the little white fluffies really did make it look more like a Santa hat. What's a Christmas project without a little bit of glitter? I'm a fan of glitter inside of glue, and I love the Stickles glue. It can dry and have a little dome texture on it when it dries, or you can even smear it around with your finger and have kind of just a nice little background of glitter on there. And I did both on this project. I wanted to replace that old little tiny bow that was on the original piece with some colors and a rag bow that would work better with what I painted. So I just used some simple scraps, made the X's. I do like using the bow dabra just even when I'm doing these small little messy bows because it's like an extra hand and I get a little bit of help, and I need all the help I can get when it comes to bow making. I just basically did some crisscrosses over the back, and then I had this ribbon in my stash that's kind of like a pom-pom ribbon that has a little bit of wire inside, and that's what I used to go ahead and tie it because I definitely wanted to bring a little bit of that blue color in that I had created and used on my ornaments. So this worked perfect for that. I was planning on reusing that wire that came in the original piece, so I just had to poke the wires back through. It was a little strange. It wasn't just plain wire. There was kind of almost like a little piece of paper coating around it, but I was able to get it back through the holes, use a little tool, clamp it on, and then be able to put the bow on it, and it worked out great. I wanted to say a special thank you to Brenda and Krista for hosting today's collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels. They're both super creative. As well as click that playlist. I'm sure there are going to be lots of fun Christmas ideas shared. Because that little blue pom-pom ribbon had wire in the middle, I was able to take a wooden skewer and wrap it around it and give it a little bit of a curl. Well, let's see what this little chickie looks like all finished and hanging in my studio. As you can see in my studio, I have lots of different seasonal things going on in there. Last week I was doing Halloween, and now this week I'm doing Christmas. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a thumbs up, leave me a comment if you enjoyed watching this little hen come together. If you enjoyed watching this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll create right along with me.